From Milwaukee's NPR, this is Capitol Notes. We break down the big political news affecting Wisconsin. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. He provides a roundup of the Wisconsin developments you need to know. Here's our latest conversation. Hi, J.R. Great to chat with you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me like always.
So last week, there was a settlement in a lawsuit by progressive Wisconsin law firm Law Forward against former President Donald Trump's attorneys, Jim Troupis and Kenneth Chesbrough. In the lawsuit that law firm brought over these attorneys' involvement in submitting a slate of false electors for Trump, even though he lost the 2020 election in Wisconsin and elsewhere. Can you tell us what the settlement directed of them, as well as the 10 Wisconsin Republicans who served as false electors for Trump?
Well, this one, like the other ones, basically says we won't do it again. So now the 10 false electors, both attorneys said we're not going to do it again. We'll be involved in passing along electors going forward. And this new one, Jim Troupis paid a financial settlement. Those terms are undisclosed. Troupis also is not acknowledging any wrongdoing, basically saying, look, this thing was going to get expensive. I didn't want to take the risk of it. I made a decision to kind of cut my potential losses. And then we found out that through this process, there were documents handed over to the State Department of Justice, headed by Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul, that are now in his hands that are part of what these guys had in their possession, explaining what happened, what went on with this process of coming up with the idea all the way through the execution of it.
So these individuals essentially had to declare and certify that the 2020 election was won by President Joe Biden, right?
Yep, that was part of it, and the 10 electors, false electors, they in that earlier settlement basically said that they were tricked. Like that was the line, kind of the argument from them of like, we thought this was all legal strategy. Because remember, the state Supreme Court had ruled against Trump like that morning, I believe it was, if I remember my dates correctly, that his lawsuit was out. There were still active appeals in the federal courts. Trump had lost, but there's an appeal pending for the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The U.S. Supreme Court didn't finally put all the rest until like sometime in, let's say, March or April of 2021. So everything from Republicans was, hey, this was a legal strategy, and we were kind of duped into thinking that, and then this actually being kind of more of a active effort to overturn the results. So that's their explanation. You see a video that was released this week as part of the settlement that shows them cheering as they were doing this, and so that infuriated some Democrats like Governor Evers, who was just incensed these guys would cheer, trying to subvert the election. But, at least now it largely puts this thing to rest, at least in terms of like the involvement of these 12 with the civil lawsuit.
And what's the latest on U.S. Senator Ron Johnson's involvement? To remind people, on January 6th, Johnson was asked by those attorneys, Troupis and Chesbrough, to deliver a document about the electors to then Vice President Mike Pence shortly before Congress was set to convene to certify Joe Biden's election victory.
Well, with Johnson, he's really kind of tried to downplay his involvement, basically saying it was on the periphery of this whole thing. It was a matter of seconds, maybe some text messages, nothing really serious. The more we're seeing of these documents, the more it kind of raises the question of, is that really how involved he was or how little involved he was? It suggests that there's a more active role in what was going on. He was more apprised of what's going on. Now, for Johnson, though, there isn't really a political fallout to worry about. One, remember, he got reelected in 2022. I don't think there's a lot of people bet he's going to run in 2028 again. He's got to make clear he's not a lifetime lawmaker kind of thing. So I don't know there's a big political thing for him to worry about. And two, if you look at polls, most voters don't really care deeply about this issue anymore. It's way in the rearview mirror. It's 3 years ago and then some. They want to move on. A lot of them want to move on and focus on something else. And I've talked to various operatives who've told me that in their polling, they don't see this as a motivating issue for the average middle, that swing voter. That's not a big deal for him or her.
So there's no way, shape, or form that Johnson, let's say more information comes out because, essentially some of the emails from this lawsuit showed that the lawyers wrote that they, quote, spoke with Senator Johnson about the Pence angle at the end and, things like that. So there's no kind of fallout that Johnson could face from any of this in any way, shape, or form?
I try and stay from predictions, my end, and so I don't want to look forward to say what might happen or what might come out. But just looking at what we've seen so far, it does seem like he's got any issues. Now, it's a little different for Josh Call. The Attorney General, so again, we saw these documents were handed over to him the course of this. There is a group of people who do seem to care about this a whole lot, and that's the Democratic Party's base. I mean, this is still a big pertinent issue for a lot of people, the threat to democracy. Joe Biden's obviously banking some of his campaign for election on the idea that people will kind of revolt against putting back in office Donald Trump after what he did to try and overturn the results of 2020. Now, for Call, it's kind of a look-ahead thing. I don't know what Josh Call is going to do. We've been asking. They will not confirm or deny the existence of an investigation. But we see various pockets of the Democratic base calling on Josh to do something. There's a perception in Madison that Josh Call has designs of maybe running for another office someday, like maybe governor. If he makes that step, there might be some people who go, wait a second, you're in a Democratic primary and you didn't really address this issue. This is a problem for me. Now, I don't know if that's a long ways off. There are people who counter, look, you got to remember that Josh Call is, in their minds, a very by-the-book kind of attorney general. He tries to stay away from politics, so he may be taking his time, but he's being cautious. Also, there's an argument from some that Call doesn't have the authority to prosecute anybody involved with this, that it would have to go to local DAs, so there's that angle. But Call's silence has created this little bit of a vacuum where there are some people speculating, okay, what's going to happen, and might there be a political price for Josh Call down the road if he doesn't do something?
You're tuned into Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. All right, switching from the fake electors lawsuit to the new topic of redistricting. So Governor Tony Evers signed new legislative district maps into law after his version of those maps was passed by the GOP-led legislature. You have said, JR, that there are about 3 to 4 truly competitive state Senate districts and about 11 swing assembly districts. Can you break down where those are, starting with any that might impact southeastern Wisconsin?
So the Senate really, the 3 top ones I'm watching are the Green Bay area, a stretch along Lake Winnebago from Appleton down to Oshkosh, north of Madison and kind of the Dells, Richland Center area. It's an open seat. There's one in the Milwaukee suburbs that's interesting. It's because Dewey Strobel, Republican from Saukville, and Dan Knodel, Republican from Germantown, were drawn in the same district. Knodel's not going to run for that Senate seat. He's going to run for the Assembly instead, it looks like. But that seat, Knodel has held it. It's Republican, but not like out of the reach for Democrats in the right environment. And Dewey Strobel has been a very conservative member of the state Senate. He's very proud of that fact. It's a much less conservative district than he is. So the question is, in an environment where we have a presidential race where suburban voters who are a large part of this district haven't been big fans of Donald Trump, might that cause Strobel some issues this fall or be a challenge for him? So that's something to watch. The assembly of those 11, they kind of around the state. One to note is there's a new district in suburban Milwaukee, the 61st. It includes like Greendale, Hales Corners, a little bit of Greenfield. Well, Bob Donovan was drawn into a district that is now Democratic leaning, actually 60% Democratic, so fairly healthy. Also has Dan Reamer, an incumbent Democrat, in that seat. So we're expecting Donovan to move into that 61st and run. It's a 50-50 seat. Again, suburban communities, election with Donald Trump top the ticket. How's that going to go? That's an interesting one. I kind of hinted another one before about Dan Knodel. Remember Janelle Branchin? News broke about a week and a half ago that the Ethics Commission has recommended her, Donald Trump's joint fundraising committee, and Adam Steen, who challenged Robin Voss in that primary a couple of years ago, and some others for possible charges, felony charges, for trying to put together a scheme to avoid campaign finance limits. Canolis is going to run in Janelle Branch's assembly seat. Now, it's a pretty Republican seat. My question is Janelle Branch going to run again? She hasn't told us what she's going to do. And if she does, she's alienated a lot of people in the Republican caucuses. She was actually voted out of the Assembly GOP caucus for various reasons. Her members basically said, we don't trust you anymore. So she's not got a lot of institutional support. With Knodel running against her, that's going to be fast to see who helps Janelle Branchin if she runs. And is her case resolved before she faces the voters? Is it still hanging over her head? It could be a really interesting dynamic in that primary. what's going on. But we're also seeing just a lot of movement right now of people declaring, I'm going to run here, I'm going to move there. For Republicans, I mean, for me, this is just a story to cover. It's interesting to watch the moving pieces. For incumbent lawmakers, this is like your life. You're talking about Rob Coles up in Green Bay saying, I'm going to move out of my condo I've been in for more than 2 decades and move a little bit to the west because my district was drawn to focus on Green Bay. He's paired now with Eric Wimberger, another Republican from Green Bay, and Andre Jacques, a Republican from De Pere in one Senate district, whereas the territory of his the second he now represents, is moved to the west. He's going to uproot himself and move out west of Green Bay to run in that district. I mean, that's a huge decision to make with what you're going to do with your life, where you're going to live. It's a great market for buyers, not sellers right now. Interest rates are kind of high. Like it's not an easy decision for these guys to make, and they're trying to figure out, where am I going to go if I want to keep this political career alive?
Yeah, this is getting complex, JR.
I have very handy charts to keep it all straight.
Yes, definitely. Well, thanks so much for keeping track of it and for explaining it to us and letting us know the lowdown. JR, the one thing I didn't ask you was, what are you looking for in the state Senate floor session this week?
Sure. So the big things that I'm watching in the Senate are, one, it's the last day we're expecting the Senate to be in. So remember, you have to pass the same bill with the same language for it to go to the governor's desk. So unless the Senate takes up an assembly bill that's already passed that House, what they do is basically dead on arrival because the assembly is gone. So if you see them voting on Senate bills, it means they're just basically messaging. They're sometimes at the end of the session, members will want to have bills passed because it caters for constituency back home. It's a pet interest, whatever. They can say, look, I worked on this bill. I got it through the Senate. Didn't make it to the Assembly. We'll try next session again. Of the Assembly bills left, we're going to see things like, stuff about race-based initiatives. We're going to see constitutional amendments probably on limiting the governor's veto power. We're going to see kind of a lot of things that, if they're not constitutional amendments, they're going to get vetoed by Evers. But they're still messaging bills, right? They're things that Republicans have as priorities, Democrats oppose, and you're going to see them hashed out in the campaign trail this fall. So it could be a day of a lot of drama. It could also be a day that's a dud, depending on what they put in the calendar. And one big thing hanging out there is called, it's a big utility transmission bill. There's about $2 billion worth of work coming into Wisconsin the next decade, I think, for high voltage transmission lines. This bill is called right of first refusal by the proponents. It would say, if you are an existing utility, you have the first shot at the work to construct these power lines because you have existing connection points and those kinds of things. Proponents say it would speed up the process, it cut through red tape and get these projects done faster. Opponents say you're basically cutting out competition, will drive up costs. It is a big bill that's been heavily lobbied. In fact, I got records a few weeks ago that showed, of all the bills in the second half of 2023, this was the most lobbied, almost twice as much as the next most lobbied bill in the legislature. That's much effort's going into it. There are big money interests behind it, trying to push it through, and they're running into resistance, especially among conservatives. That's going to be the drama next week. Do they take up, we call it ROFR, right of first refusal. Does ROFR make the final cut? Chances aren't real great for it right now, but that's what the drama might be when they meet next week.
Wow, and do you think Evers would sign it if it passed both houses?
Good question. They got to get there first, and there are people who have really questioned whether they're going to get through both houses because, again, they have to do the assembly version of the bill. There are techniques they could use to get that bill on the floor because it's kind of caught up in committee right now, but it is high drama and high money on the final day of the state Senate's session.
Wow, real housewives of the Wisconsin legislature.
Yes.
Okay, sounds good, JR. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was JR Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WEWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.